The year that was, from politics shaking up Michigan to big moves in Detroit to the national spotlight and everything in between. It's our take on the stories of the year. It's Sunday, December 29th, and this is Flashpoint. Hi there, I'm Christy McDonald, and welcome to Flashpoint. I'm so glad that you're here with me on this Sunday. Hope you're enjoying this holiday time with your family. And can you believe we are just days away from saying goodbye to 2024? It feels like this year was drinking from a fire hose. The news just kept on coming. From the presidential election that dominated the headlines and the ad space here in Michigan, to the balance of power in Washington that has changed, and here in our state too. Plus, Detroit was in the national spotlight. Couple 100,000 of our newest friends in for a record-breaking NFL draft. News that General Motors plans to move down the street to the new Hudson's building, leaving questions about the RenCen. Well, how about Ford's grand opening of Michigan Central in Corktown? That was a Detroit celebration. We'll talk about the year that was with our roundtable today, and then our take on the biggest stories to come in 2025. Flashpoint starts right now. Well, we have excellent company to hash through 2024 and peer maybe into the crystal ball of 25. So say hello to Nolan Finley, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, sitting next to Stephen Henderson of Bridge Detroit. Wow, this is a feeling of deja vu I see with me sitting next to you two fellas. Over on my other side, Portia Roberson, the CEO of Focus Hope, and Jason Rowe, Republican political strategist. It's good to have you all in here as we hash out 24 because nothing really happened. As I said in the intro, it was like drinking through a fire hose this year. So I figure that we could start off politics-wise with the presidential election. But really, what did it show us about Michigan? What did we learn about Michigan from the presidential election this year? I'm going to start with you, Stephen, since you're making a face.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I learned was that that I don't know as much about what is on people's minds and what's happening in people's lives as I should. You know, in the roles that I play, I should have been able to read more of what was happening than I did, and you know, that's something I will correct in 2025 is spending more time in different parts of the state, just I think connecting with people about what's happening in their lives and what inspires them, what makes them scared. You know, I keep getting this question from people calling from other places, Washington and New York or the West Coast, and I keep saying, I actually don't know. I really don't know. And I think those of us who are out of touch with that stuff have to kind of own up to that right now.
And it's interesting to think about that. So, Nolan, what did you learn, or what do you think that this shows us?
Well, I mean, it shows us that Michigan is very much like the rest of the nation. People are going to keep voting for change until they actually get it. They're dissatisfied with the way things are going. This year, they were dissatisfied with the economy, and Democrats didn't want to talk to them about the economy, wanted to assure them that, no, you're okay, you're okay. I mean, people want their concerns addressed. And I would predict that if Donald Trump and the Republicans don't address their concerns and don't give them the change they're looking for, in 2028, they're going to be out on the street as well.
Yeah, I think that's good, you know, looking forward to what that's going to mean. But it's not just change for change's sake. Are we that fickle, Portia?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump did an excellent job of convincing people that he was going to be different this time around by talking about the things he talked about before. And so it's interesting to me that the response was that what is old is new again, and that's what they voted for. I also think that what I learned is that maybe the country is not as ready for a black woman to be president as we thought we thought that they were. You know, Joe Biden used to say, I was the only one who beat Donald Trump, and I'm the only one who can do it again. And maybe he knew something that the rest of us sort of didn't think about, was that he knew that America, a country that he served for a long time in various roles, was not ready to elect a black woman as president.
Do you think that we haven't talked about that enough?
I'm sorry?
Do you think we haven't talked about that?
Oh, I absolutely think we haven't talked about it enough. I think, you know, I've been on a number of text chains where people talked about what the Dems did wrong and what the Dems couldn't do and so on and so forth. And the reality of it is yes, there are some things that the Dems needed to do differently. There's no question about that. And we all have learned that with this past election. But I think fundamentally what I really took away from this election is that the country does not want to see not only just a woman, but a black woman be president.
Jason, what did you learn from this, and what do you think that we can take out of it?
Well, two things. I think first, I think Michigan demonstrated more than any other state that the realignment of the traditional coalitions and constituencies of the parties is real. You had in Michigan, unlike a lot of the other states, an Arab population. Trump won Dearborn and Dearborn Heights. That's pretty remarkable. I don't think anyone saw that coming. You see the increases in the black vote with working class voters, Latinos. Probably the biggest surprise is with young voters, what happened there. And when you look at the margin by what he won, a bigger margin than he lost in 20 and a bigger margin than he won in 16. And I think it'll be interesting to see where Michigan and the Republican Party go. I would take issue, though, with what Portia said about America not being ready to elect a black woman. America was not ready to elect Kamala Harris. She was a historically bad candidate. And I have, had a number of these conversations, and I think everyone forgets that America, in terms of the popular vote, in 3 consecutive elections voted for a black man twice and a woman. Now, that's not a black woman, but Kamala Harris was not a vetted candidate. She was not a good candidate. And that whole process by how she became the nominee was a very clunky one that I think civilians, non-political people watching that had a lot of questions about her ascendancy.
Portia, if we were sitting at a restaurant, you would just jump right in.
Right. I would, because I disagree wholeheartedly. First of all, Kamala Harris was a much smarter, better candidate than Donald Trump. I mean, listen, there's not a lot of people I wouldn't have voted for against Donald Trump. I think he is a historically bad president, was before, will be again. And I don't think it was just about Kamala was so bad. What was so bad about her? She served as a prosecutor. She served in the United States Senate. She served as vice president. She ran for president. What more are you all looking for from women candidates?
That's resume. That's not message. She had no message, and she admitted her.
So the messaging versus the person actually in the role. You want her to be a better messenger, but did you want her to be a better president? Because what we're getting again in 2.0 of Donald Trump is going to be horrific.
Well,
and those Muslims and other people in Dearborn who voted for her, who voted for him, are going to find that out.
This was the first election where people could put 2 candidates side by side, and one had been president, one had been vice president, and say, we know how they govern, and they chose Donald Trump.
So let's
and
go
they
ahead.
chose for a reason, because the Biden administration governed so poorly.
And they also chose him against Hillary Clinton.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about, though, how messaging maybe then changed people's perceptions of what a record was or not. And that, I think, goes directly to something that you mentioned off the top, is about media coverage, media presence, understanding, and then maybe going around mainstream media. Jason, I'm going to jump over to you. What role do you think that we're going to be seeing going forward of the media in presidential elections in terms of they can bypass big interviews, they can go straight to social media?
Well, listen, we've been navigating a fragmentation of media and how people get their information now for many, many years, but never was it more highlighted than what we just saw. The influence of traditional mainstream media is really plummeting, and when you look particularly what's happening with MSNBC and CNN right now, down 50 and 60% in viewers since the election. You look at the evening news, whether it is NBC, CBS, or ABC evening news, is not drawing the viewers that they once did, and that's not a good thing, because we should all have common information that we are working from to have a shared view of the world, but it's so fragmented that we're
but
not
it's also, it looks like it's swaying to what people want to hear as well, Stephen. And let me ask you this. When we saw what happened with the debates and the fact that the Presidential Debate Commission now is blown out of the water, that candidates don't have to agree to that, we're working in a different world when it comes to messaging.
It's more of a Wild West kind of information landscape, and it's dangerous because there's misinformation out there, there's disinformation out there, and there are a lot of people who profit from the division that we're seeing and the conflicts that we're all enduring. We have a lot of things to fix in this country, and a lot of them don't have anything to do with government. They have to do with us and the culture, the way we relate to each other, the way we think about each other. I agree with Portia, of course. America's not ready to elect a black woman president. That didn't surprise me. I think this was probably the wrong time to try that. But that's a part of a much bigger narrative of division and us just not seeing each other that I think we got to get after.
Anything that you change as an editorial page editor going forward, looking at this, Nolan?
Well, I mean, you have to look at what's happened in this election, and the most influential media moments did not come from newspapers like the New York Times or the Washington Post, didn't come from ABC, NBC. It came from Joe Rogan and Charlemagne the God and the woman on The View. Not the sources that you would expect to play the major influential role on an election. And so we all have to look and say, you know, what's our role and how do we adapt to this new environment and how do we deliver our message in a more effective way?
One thing that I also wanted to talk about in terms of something that I watched this year was the role of Governor Gretchen Whitmer nationally. How she found herself, timing-wise, Portia, in this area of releasing her book right around the week that Joe Biden decided to take himself out of the race, and that she is now one of the first 3 people being mentioned for the Democratic Party. What do you think when you see this happening, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I'm challenged to decide whether or not even a Whitmer presidency can be a success or campaign can be a success, because again, I think that the country may not be ready for a woman to lead this country. I think there's some real concerns in all communities about whether or not they're ready for that. I think that there's some stereotypes that go with that. I think, you know, it was interesting when Joe Biden decided he wasn't going to run, it really shifted all the conversations, because, you know, the assumption was that Joe Biden would serve 4 more years, he could win, and then there was going to be this line of good people, solid people. Now it's been shaken up again, so we'll see what happens in 4 years. I think Gretchen Whitmer is going to be named. I think we're going to see what Pete Buttigieg does, whether he comes back to Michigan and runs here, or whether he decides to hold out to run for president. There are a lot of good people in line, and it's going to be interesting to see who rises to the top.
It's going to be a good one. All right, we're going to continue that politics conversation. Also, some of the biggest headlines coming out of Detroit. Also looking at what is going to be, I think, a very interesting mayoral race coming up. We're going to get to all of that when we come right back. Stay with me. Welcome back to our year in review. Before we leave Michigan politics, Nolan, I want to jump to you really quickly. Talk to me about Michigan Republicans now. This is a different age for them. They are going to be able to have control of the state house, and a party that's starting to climb back a little bit from what we saw even about a year and a half ago.
Well, we'll see, because, yeah, they did get back the state house, and that was a monumental effort. You can credit a lot of people for that, Rick Snyder, Pete Hoekstra, et cetera. But they're sort of at a turning point, too. I mean, they've got the House, but all they can do really is block. They can't get an agenda through. And if, you know, Pete Hoekstra is now off to the Netherlands as a an ambassador, will the party put itself back in the hands of its more destructive forces, or will it continue this more progressive path it's on and try to broaden the party? And I think it could go either ways.
All right, and given what we saw at the end of the year here in the legislature, it's going to be interesting to see where we hit in 25. All right, I want to jump to Detroit and a lot of the things that we saw, I think, business-wise this year, and also big celebration-wise in the city. I mean, you look at the NFL draft, and then you look at Ford's celebration, the opening in Corktown, and then GM's announcement that they are going to be moving from the RenCen into the Hudson's building. Stephen, I want you to take a good crack at this first. When you look at all of those things put together, how would you assess where the city of Detroit is right now?
Well, it's in a different space than I can remember it being, maybe ever, right, reputationally. I mean, people from all over the country now think really highly of Detroit, and they get excited when you mention it. And I even when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, that was not the case. And so that does set up, I think, a really interesting narrative for the political races that we'll have this year. How do you build on that and then not also ignore the challenges that we still have? I mean, there's lots of places in the city and lots of people in the city, I think, that face real burdens and obstacles to success. I don't think we've done the best job at translating things like the NFL draft, which was like the highest point, into change for people who are still stuck trying to just make ends meet. I think that's the story for 25 is who can step forward and say, I can make this matter to all the people who live here.
Yeah, you have unique perspective on that as the head of Focus Hope.
Yeah, I think Stephen is spot on. I mean, there's still a lot of people out there who need a lot of help. And I think, there are a lot of candidates that have already, their names have been mentioned as running for mayor. There are going to be a few more, I think, as we move into 2025.
A few more?
There are going to be a few more.
You'd like to say,
there is
Portia?
not one thing that I'd like to say other than there are going to be others that enter the race.
You know I had to ask,
I know
right?
you did. I know you did.
A lot of us are working on that stuff.
I think what people have to realize is that as much as we've had some really great successes over the last, 16 years, 12 years? How long has Mayor Duggan? 12 years? I think there are some things coming up that are really going to challenge the next mayor. I think, we've got pension legacy payments that are going to have to be made. Yeah. We still got to create a really active tax base in the city of Detroit. With tax abatements, you don't have a lot of people paying heavy taxes. So there's still going to be some serious challenges for the next mayor. And I think, oftentimes people talk about being mayor and they talk about what has happened and what's good, and there are a lot of things that are good, and they can move into those roles, but there are some challenges there that people got to really consider when they're thinking about running.
One thing that people have been talking about so much is the move GM is going to be making from the RenCen to the Hudson's building, and then what does that mean for the RenCen? And all the ideas that have been floated about, and then everything that GM said, well, if we do this, looking for incentives. Jason, what's your take on that?
Listen, I remember as a little kid when the RenCen was being built and erected.
Is the RenCen on your tie?
It is.
No, is it actually right now?
And I actually covered the ribbon cutting of the RenCen.
Tell us how old you are without telling us how old you are.
No, Phil, come on now.
As my kids say, that's back in the 19s.
The 19.
Did they really say that?
They do say that.
That makes me sweat. Sorry, Jason, we cut you off. Go ahead.
But that was supposed to be symbolic of the Renaissance in the 70s. Which didn't really materialize, followed not too far after by the People Mover, which didn't really materialize. But the Renaissance Center is such an iconic part of our skyline now, and to me it's sad, the idea that we're going to have to take some of those towers down, and it is going to, I think, change. But it's also, that's what happens when a city starts to move ahead and figures out who it is. And Stephen's right, Detroit's sexy right now, and we've got a lot going on, but Portia's also right. If you live in Detroit, it's hard to make ends meet, whether it is auto insurance or it is property taxes. The Detroit tax base, for those that are paying taxes, it is high, but it is an expensive city to live in. And I know a lot of people in the suburbs that would love to live in the city for a lot of different reasons, but when they do the math, it doesn't make sense to live in the city of Detroit. So there's a lot that still has to happen for the people that live and work in the city.
Well, Christy, what's happened at the Renaissance is also indicative of a looming problem for the city of Detroit. There's too much office space, and we've had hundreds of millions of dollars spent over the last decade converting these big buildings into offices, and now every month leases are coming up for renewal and not being renewed, and that's a problem in every major downtown in the country. What to do with all this excess office space?
Yeah, what's going to be some of the pitfalls, do you think, Stephen, in this negotiation process of trying to reconfigure something so iconic and also looking for tax breaks along the way?
Nolan's right. This is not just about the RenCen. This is about the glut of office space in downtown Detroit, and we have not dealt with that for a really long time. I think it's a mistake to have a conversation about the RenCen without that bigger office space conversation, but also outside the context of the other changes downtown. I-375 reconfiguration and bringing back that neighborhood. That's right next to the RenCen. You can't talk about one logically without talking about the other. Talking about Jefferson Avenue and the fact that the RenCen was built on the wrong side of Jefferson Avenue by any kind of urban planner's assessment. What can we do to bring whatever we do there back into the core of downtown and have it matter more? There's a bunch of stuff we got to think a lot about, and unfortunately, no one's leading that conversation. I mean, the I-375 thing is really off the rails. MDOT's doing, in my judgment, a really horrible job leading that conversation. Other people are trying and not being heard. The RenCen is off and running without, again, talking about how it connects to everything else. We got to think of it as one space and one problem.
You want to say anything about the mayoral race coming up and people starting to line up? I mean,
I'm voting for Portia. I'm writing Portia in if she doesn't run.
She's like, don't you start the right end then. Before we go to our predictions.
It's going to be wild. I mean, and exciting. I mean, this is the first real contested mayoral election that we've had, or I think it will be, since 2013. That's a long time. There are a lot of things we need to think about. There are a lot of things we need to talk about, and this is the setting for that to happen. Already we have enough candidates, I think, to do that, and I'm hoping some more throw their hats in.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. All right, so I've got my magic 8-ball here, not really, but if we could think about what's one thing that you're going to be looking for as we all take a much-needed rest and relax here, but going into 25. Let me start with you, Nolan.
I guess we'll see if Donald Trump can keep this coalition together and if he can actually use this majority in the Congress to get some constructive things done, particularly whether, you know, this initiative to cut waste and efficiency and bring spending into check can get done. We're not off to a great start on that, but I think the #1 mission for him is to turn this spending trajectory around. And if he doesn't do that, I don't think people are going to be real happy with him.
And the role of Elon Musk, we'll continue to watch that. Jason, what about you? What are you looking for in 25?
Perfect segue. It is DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, I think this is going to be the first really wholesale look at how our federal government governs, how the various departments and agencies that we fund with our taxpayer dollars have been performing their tasks. And so you have in the nominations for cabinet secretaries for all of these departments, critics of the departments that they will lead. And then you have Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk with the Department of Government Efficiency that are going to go in and look at ways to find savings and efficiencies. And that's going to cause some pain for a lot of people. And I'm going to be interested to see how it happens. But we're running over a $6 trillion nearly $7 trillion annual budget. We're running nearly $2 trillion in debt off of that, and we've got a $36 trillion debt. So we've got to get under control. It's not sustainable. We're spending $1 trillion a year to service the debt in interest payments alone.
All right, Portia, what are you looking for?
I think I'm just going to be watching Trump 2.0. I mean, there were a lot of promises made during the campaign, and a lot of folks believe that messaging that Nolan mentioned, and I'm wondering and will be very surprised if he delivers on much of that messaging. I think that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be questioning very quickly why they voted for this man.
You're liable to get excited, Portia.
Probably not.
That is
Probably
a
not.
checklist I'm going to be looking forward to seeing when we get back. You get the last 30 seconds.
So I'm going to spend a lot of 25 trying to reacquaint myself with Michigan and Michiganders. I really am going to make an effort to get out and reconnect with people about what's going on in the state and in their lives and what matters. And I think a lot of us probably need to do that.
All right. So happy New Year, folks. We'll see you in 25. Sit tight. We'll be right back.
Travels with Steve.
That is going to do it for Flashpoint this week. I hope you have a happy new year and that you're ready to join us in 2025 as Flashpoint tackles the biggest political questions, issues, and stories in Michigan and beyond. It is conversation and analysis that you have come to depend on, and we will have it for you. For all of us at Local 4, I'm Christy McDonald. See you next week.